or Frankenstein's monster as in the physical, oh, spooky. So like there's like the physical horror monster, but there's also just the idea of monstrosity as like cruelty adjacent, like cruelty to a massive extent, right? So I don't think those two things are inextricably linked, which is kind of why I love Frankenstein, because the monster is a monster, but he's not a monster. So what monsters do I like? I really liked Breaking Bad. Walter White is a monster.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm caught in this thought cycle. What is so you like pop culture vampires, clearly. Because not all of your love for Twilight is ironic.
Not all of it is ironic, but at the same time, I don't know. It's like there's so much pop culture vampire stuff that I just have not watched. I haven't watched True Blood. I haven't watched the originals. I think that's
I
vampire.
don't even know what the originals is.
It's what pops up on Netflix when they're like, you watched Penny Dreadful, so here are 14 other things that I assume you like. I watched Penny Dreadful, speaking of Frankenstein's monster, and it does
What is Penny Dreadful?
It was a short-lived series. I don't remember the exact dates, but it had Ava Green in it. And it was Green? Like, oh God, she was Daniel Craig's first Bond girl. She was in Sin City, a Dame to Kill. Anyway, she's hot. Moving on.
Okay. I don't know any movies.
It had Timothy Dalton in it. It was basically a Victorian monster mash. So you had the Frankenstein monster and the creator. You had Dorian Gray. Dracula showed up at the end. There was a second season with witches that was freaky. I thought.
Did they do Dorian Gray how like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen did Dorian Gray?
How do you mean?
Like he's like immortal because all the damage that is taken by Dorian Gray goes onto the picture of Dorian Gray.
Yeah, and okay. He eventually shacks up with the Bride of Frankenstein because they're both kind of invulnerable. Except Dorian Gray is a whiny man-child, which makes sense.
Very petulant, yeah.
Yeah, and Ava Green's character is, I don't know, she's like being courted by the devil. I'll be honest with you, it's gorgeous, but doesn't make a lot of sense. So yeah.
Just so like me.
Sorry. Yeah, you know, maybe you'd like it. Patty LuPone was in it. It was just the damnedest thing. So there's a lot that I missed, but right now, my vampire groove right now is I've been watching a lot of 1970s horror movies. Like Hammer stuff with Christopher Lee. I watched Dracula AD 1972 last night, which was just, aren't we all sick of this by now? But apparently not. You know, between Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. And my husband asked, have they ever done a movie where Peter Cushing was the vampire and Christopher Lee was Van Helsing? I'm like, no, but they totally should have, because I want to watch that movie now.
Van Helsing is a sore subject for me because the one thing that was taken out of Vampire Gideon, not one thing, but one of the things, was a side plot with a vampire hunter named Han Velsing, and was solely in there so I could make the joke Han Velsing like 25 to 30 times and have all the other characters be like, you seem so incompetent. And then our wonderful editor, Christine, was like, hey, so do you think this joke is worth 20-ish pages of a relatively short book? And I was like, no, we can get rid of it. It's fine.
I had some conversations like that with Christine.
Yeah, she's so good at what she does.
She's awesome. But I remember, I think it was July 3rd or something, she first got back to me with a round of edits, which required me to rewrite a substantial portion of the novel. And when everything rhymes, that's a lot.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Yeah. Ultimately, I had to write like 5 more stanzas. So it was like, but there was this major, you need to move this over here and then patch this. And then I'm like, okay, well, what if I change this plot point? And I remember freaking out because I had a month to do. I did it. It worked and it was brilliant.
I'm glad it worked out. It'd be a very different conversation had it not.
The thing is that when you spend 2 years writing Pushkin sonnets, you get pretty good at it.
Yeah.
And
Practice makes better.
I talked to a fellow writer of mine in my group, and he read the book, and he said, after I read it, I was just thinking in the sonnets for a couple of weeks. It's like getting a song stuck in your head.
Do you know the song "The Trapeze Swinger" by Iron and Wine? It's like a 9-minute song. It's very good.
It's a great song.
Yeah, anytime I listen to that, I wind up thinking in that specific meter for like the next few hours or days.
Yeah, when I would get stuck writing, I would take my English translation of Pushkin off the wall, because I, of course, got one that was translated into verse. And just pick a random page and start reading until you think you got the flow back, and then put it back on the shelf and go back and do your book.
Actually, I have a quick question for you, Jessica, and also Andrew as well. I wonder sort of how your respective backgrounds might have resonated in the book. So specifically what made me think of that is your background in Egyptology. I wonder if sort of that sort of undead factor, you think of mummies. When people think of Egypt, they think of mummies. I wonder if that sort of had any sort of correlation. Yeah, and just sort of, I guess, generally, in what ways do you feel like your backgrounds have affected the work itself, or culminated in the idea of the book?
Andrew,
real quick, you can no, this is just, you can coin it. You can pioneer hot mummies. Boom. That's you.
Oh, well, there's plenty of hot mummy action in Egyptian myth. I mean, if you read the stories about Cyrus coming back to life, basically by being, doinked back to life by his wife.
How do they spell coming in that?
Naughty. As far as this book, though, short answer, no Egyptology in it whatsoever. Ancient Egypt and I broke up. I mean, I'll always love ancient Egypt. We made 2 beautiful theses together. But, there comes a time when, you just want different things. So for this book, that particular thing didn't really come up, although I did write a short story that takes place in like Ptolemaic mystery cults, which is just, here's my dissertation with a plot attached, won't you? No one has bought it yet. So, someday I am going to make my own short story collection. Like, no, someone is going to read this damn story. But I did teach anthropology for 8 years. So I read a lot of stories where human being is involved romantically with something that is not human, whether it's an animal or a god or something in between. So a lot of that, it influences the whole vampire romance thing, just any of the maidens and monsters. A couple weeks ago, I was doing a talk with our fellow Lanternfish Press sibling, Matt Vesely, about his elegy for the undead.
I love Matthew.
A whole love with people that ain't human, and how that works. So I brought a lot of that to like, okay, here are these tropes, and what I brought to it that mythology does and most modern vampire romance doesn't is, spoiler alert, it does not last. Whenever humans get involved with non-humans in mythology, 9 times out of 10, one of them's going to wind up pregnant or dead, and not necessarily in that order.
It went great with the Minotaur, though.
Yeah, so many happy couples I know met the same way. Yeah, so that's something that, stuff that pisses us off about pop culture. This Beauty and the Beast style story, and they were meant to be together and they will love forever. Like, no, they're not.
At least Beauty and the Beast, they're both technically human.
By the end, sure.
Yeah, they totally bang when they're not both human. Oh, Shrek too. What? Oh, no.
I hate Shrek.
I've never connected Shrek to Beauty and the Beast before right now.
Oh, man.
And I'm going to be fucked up about this.
Seriously.
Am I dumb? Is that
No,
what I
you're
just
not dumb.
learned?
You just didn't teach anthropology for 8 years and have like constant monstrous marriage stories in your face. Hey, everything is Beauty and the Beast. Like I was telling my students, there's a scene in Disney's Beauty and the Beast where she teaches the beast how to use a fork. This idea that the girl, because the monster is usually, not always, but these stories, the monster's the boy, the human's the girl, and she's going to teach him how to be human. Like Margot is going to make Gideon watch Jason Statham movies and try to bring him kicking and screaming into this century. And yeah, so it's the whole women are supposed to civilize men and turn the monsters into humans. And then I'm like, if you watch Thor, the first Thor movie, I mean, I'm not saying you have to, but if you do, because it's on and you're not doing anything, there's a scene where he gets a cup of coffee and then smashes his mug on the floor and asks for another. And of course, the brilliant astrophysicist has to go, no, you don't do that. We don't throw our cups on the floor. What's wrong with you? I'm like, oh my God.
Awesome society.
Yeah, so
great.
if you're a girl, doesn't matter how smart you are, you're going to have to be mom to this guy and teach him how to not spill things and use a fork. That does not happen in my book. Booyah. If people still say booyah, they probably don't.
I think you said it.
I said it, but people write vampires because they're up to the minute and stuff. I set my book in the 60s so I wouldn't have to figure out how texting worked.
Yeah, I never ever specified any sort of dates because I was like, I don't know. It worked for, that's a weird reference. I was going to say it worked for Mike Warmke, the evangelist stand-up comedian who just like lied horrifically about his whole life with no regards to timeline, and if you try to verify anything, it's just so obvious he lied about everything. I was listening to a podcast where they talked about him and his like very heavy hand in the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s. It's really interesting. What was the initial thing for this? The initial question that on this?
Yeah, just sort of how you feel like maybe your background or your upbringing may have led into your writing, or maybe even spawned the idea.
Yeah, so for me, definitely the only thing I know really well from experience is like mental illness. So I'm just always writing about mental illness because I'm diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and major depressive disorder and ADHD. And my first suicide attempt was at like 10. So like writing has been a godsend, but it's the thing that I know like intimately. It's the thing that like no one, I have like, so there again, the idea of like expert advice, right? Like who is an expert on what topic? I'm not saying that I'm not a trained professional or an expert on mental illness or anything like that. I just know what it feels like to struggle with these things. And that is the one thing that I'm certain that like no one can tell me I don't have that experience. And I'd be like, I'm pretty sure I do though. Because that happens a lot. Like, I'm not a scientist who works in solar. So I have a lot of interactions with people where they're like, well, actually it's this. And I know they're wrong, but I have that little second of doubt. And I'm like, wait, no, fuck you. But like, there's still that second of it. So if I'm going to put something on paper, I want to be very confident that I believe in it, and belief in faith or other concepts along with monstrosity that will get me tied in knots. But yeah, basically everything I write is about mental illness and like communication, right? Because how do we talk about these things? How do we learn from these things? How do we try to identify them in ourselves and others and connect and like start to build healthier communities based on like real world identification and connection and empathy. And empathy is the key to it. And that's obviously not the prettiest, most common thing that people have with strangers. And so just trying to like write ways to show like, hey, like these are people or monsters or anything of all sorts that feel the same things that you do. It's the idea of Sonder, where it's the awareness that like every person you walk by on the street has a life every bit as intricate and complicated as your own, which is like mind numbing when you actually think about it after you walk by four people on the street, and are like, oh God, they have X amount of years of the same amount of things. So that's really what like drives my writing, is just like, hey, like pretty mentally ill, functioning really well, able to talk about it. And that is super, super helpful. And these are some conversations that aren't easy, but like you can have, and they'll probably help, or maybe not, because everything is contextual and nothing is very, very easy in life unless you were born super mega rich in America. And even then, I'm sure like those people have their own complex set of issues and problems, and empathy for the 1% doesn't feel good for whatever reason, but I guess I believe in it.
Remember what the philosopher said, mo money, mo problems.
The truth. I was actually just talking to my dad about the allegory of the cave and how like learning is literally physically painful. Question answered?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for
Cool.
sharing all that.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is like past the point of like giving a shit. I don't know. Just like people should talk about their issues and know that it's like it can help other people, or maybe not, but it could help you. It's just important to communicate like the realities of reality. That wasn't well said, but I think the point plays.
Yeah.
Well, then I have a question, because I thank you for everything you said, and thumbs
You're
up to it.
welcome.
But I'm wondering, then you could have just written a novel about regular human people who talk about mental illness and suicide and empathy and the complicated lives. How do you think having a monstrous inhuman character at the middle, does it change anything? Does it shift the focus? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple things with that. One is just very pragmatic. It's much easier to pitch, hey, it's a vampire who runs a suicide hotline.
Sure.
Because Gideon is like a vampire and I got to have a little bit of fun with it, but for the most part, he's just not really like a vampire. Like I got to play with the tropes, right? Like he can become a big bat because that's fun. Or he heats up blood to 98.6 degrees in a pan because like, if you're a vampire in the modern day, like you don't have to fucking eat people. Granted, I'm not very good on vampire lore, but I know that they drink blood. So
They're
like,
not real. So once you've got the blood drinking, you basically just make stuff up.
right. So it was a way to have like a little more fun with it, add some comedy to because if it's human, it's just dark, where when it's a vampire, it can have a lot more fun with it and like have like splice in the silly conversations with the things that I don't understand about vampires, where it's like, oh, like you shouldn't kill yourself. It's like, oh, right. So like, does your dick work? And like, just like that kind of thing, I've always found funny. So just like the non sequiturs, I guess, the vampire was really easy to use for that.
I wonder if that also, you said practical reasons it's easier to pitch a book about vampires, but maybe also it's then easier to read one. And so you can use it as sort of this back door to get people to read a dark story about mental health issues and problems that maybe they wouldn't normally. I would not normally read a book about humans talking about that stuff, because it's not that I don't care. It's just that if I want to talk about dark mental health problems, there are people I can call. Let's just say that.
It's fucking sad. I tried to, so the novel I've been working on for a few years there's no sci-fi fantasy elements, and it's about a teenager on an isolated property of land with his alcoholic parents and younger brother, and he winds up losing the use of his legs. His dog gets shot. He's badly bullied. There's no upswing, and I'm like, I need a little something in that.
So it's a musical.
Yes. And I was gonna start free riffing a song, and that would have been a bad idea.
Yeah.
I'm not going to. But so yeah, I think that having a degree of separation is very important, because otherwise it's just depressing. Whereas making things palatable makes them palatable, and using like pop culture and vampires and other things that people can say like, oh, well, this isn't real, I think is a really good way to maybe connect with like, okay, so this is a thing that I know people deal with, but like I can get through it because also like there's a vampire narrative happening with like vampire stuff.
I read Stephen Graham Jones wrote a piece for the New York Times about why horror and why you should read horror, because I was,
Is it the trauma article?
no, I don't think so.
Okay.
It was, I read this after I heard an interview with him where someone's like, why are you writing horror? Isn't the world bad enough? Why do you have to make it worse? It's like, okay, person who does not read horror, that's fine.
Yeah.
But he's
Very
like,
aggressive reaction.
but he said, you know what horror does? It ends. It's a 400-page book, or it's a 2-hour movie, and it can go to these dark places, but then is it going to be a happy ending? Not necessarily, but you know, when the world is just so relentlessly bleak sometimes, it can be good to have something that's even bleaker, but it stops.
Yeah. Plus, also for the record, the Vampire Gideon Suicide Hotline is not like a super depressing.
No, it's not.
Like, yeah, I feel like it's important to say that after this. I'd like to think it ends on an up note as well, but
It's definitely more up than loss of legs and dog and.
Yeah, that one. So we got to do something about that one.
I
Okay.
I can see why that's a challenge for you, and I wish strength to your writing arm.
So natural sequel to Vampire Gideon. It's called Frankenstein Esquire. It's Frankenstein's monster as an overworked public defender, just ranting against systemic injustice. It's just like, they chased me with pitchforks and that has nothing on this shit. And that's my whole bit for that.
That is fantastic. Yeah, I certainly would too.
It will likely never be written, but the more I think about it, the more appealing it becomes to me.
Maybe that's the thing to work on when you need a break.
I don't get time for breaks.
Oh, yeah. Right.
This is the closest thing I'll have to a break tonight. I have to go back to work after to make a bunch of phone calls. Let's not get into that. Okay. So, you said the stanza is like, you started like thinking in them and they really became like second nature. And so you were able to make these edits. Like, how much time did you sort of like labor over the rhyming schemes? Because that doesn't compute with me. Like how strenuous was that? Obviously it became easier over time, as things do. But like when you started doing it, were you just like, okay, so like night rhymes with right, let's fill in before that? Or
I don't know, it's all kind of a blur. Certainly I don't remember how I did those first two stanzas that I ever wrote are still in the book, so I'm kind of proud of that. But it was like when I first started, it was like, okay, so I would draw myself these charts, you know, here's where the stress goes. And then I'm like, this is way too ahead of where I am. So I would like write it out in prose. And I'm like, where do I want to break up the stanzas and where do I want to break up the lines? And then I worry about what rhymes with what. And I will tell you with only the tiniest bit of shame that I use rhymezone.com a lot. I mean,
Paid partnership. No, I'm kidding.
yeah, I thank the guy who ran the site in my acknowledgements, because I remember there was one day when it stopped working. And it was like, no, I can't do this. I mean, I had a chart of all the consonant sounds I could come up with in English. It was like, when I don't have rhyme zone, I can use this to, so, D, key, D, B, you know, just do that to figure out rhymes, and it works, but rhyme zone was indispensable. And there were times where it's like the rhyme drives the plot. Not just the plot, but it drives this stanza. It's like, what these characters are going to say is what is going to fit here. I remember one time I brought some stanzas to my writing group, and one guy said, I don't know if I like this word here. And I'm like, well, you know what, Bob? That word rhymes, that word scans, and that word means 90% of what I want it to. That word stays.
That's a Bob criticism for all the Bobs out there. You stop being so Bob about that word choice.
Yeah.
It's the right word. It
Yeah.
rhymes. And it conveys the message.
Some people ask me, like, did you write it in verse so that it would be edit proof? I'm like, it's not edit proof. Ask Christine. It's perfectly possible to edit and criticize stuff that's written in verse.
I would love to see Christine like toe to toe with like the greatest writers and just have her just be like, no, this is why this could be better, and just like be right. Be so satisfying. I really have nothing but faith in her.
Yeah. For a second, because I'm out of water, and of course I start coughing. I'll be right back.
Beep. The other idea.
The first time this happened during an event, I was so embarrassed, and I'm like, no, screw it. I need water.
Yeah, water is good. Speaking
Especially
of,
the ones they make you read. It's like, I just read for 10 minutes and I have no spit left. So
the first ever reading I did, I had a ginger ale and stopped halfway through the second page and just belched. And I was like, well, can't get worse than this, everybody. Like, let's keep going. Classy. Yeah.
So
Could you hear me?
That was that. Yep. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I started asking a question, but I was on mute. So would you say, sort of in summary, that writing in verse is more of a limiting? Is it sort of limit your creativity, or does it maybe liberate your creativity in some ways?
People will tell you that writing with a strict form is liberating. I don't know what they're talking about, but what I will say, when people ask me, why did I write this in verse? There are two reasons. The first reason is it was easier. And this, that's totally true, though. People always, their eyes pop out when I say that, but you want to make sure that you're only saying what is absolutely necessary in a piece. Try writing it in a structured poetic form. There were subplots in this book. They're like, do you want to, I was like, I have to ask myself, Jessica, do you want to write 20 stanzas that explain, do you? Didn't think so. It's out. So it did that. And I love working with forms because that's just the kind of person I am. Like I said, I have this weird relationship with my prose writing, but when there's a structure, you at least know when something rhymes and you're there. So that part of it made it easier for me to have a structure to work with. And the second reason why I wrote it in verse is that I do not like mushy stuff. I have a tough time with it. No one who reads this book believes me, but it's true. And thinking about opera structures and using this kind of structure, it's sort of, I don't know what it did, but it helped me break through that so that I could write incredibly gushy, kissy scenes and not feel crippling self-consciousness while I was doing so.
That's very interesting.
So in that way, it was liberating because otherwise, I don't know, I just get feelings are, to quote the great Bender, feelings are bad and should be hated. But that's not a positive thing for writers. So he's like, you got to get through this somehow. And if writing it that it rhymes helps me, then that's what I do.
I like that. Yeah, I think that having the, like, that makes sense to me, Jessica. Like, having the structure is obviously full of pros and cons, but at the end of the day, it's like, well, I have to, it sort of gives you that like trapdoor out, right? Where you're like, well, I had to do it this way.
Yeah.
And then you don't get tied up in that forever and ever. I like that.
Yeah, it's good. I recommend it to people to at least try, and people are so dang impressed with it. Like, what, this isn't hard. I'm like, except I've been doing it for 2 years and change straight. So maybe that has something to do with the practice.
Practice usually helps.
Yeah, it does. I remember in the middle of my edits, I actually, because I couldn't help myself, pulled up a new Word document and wrote in the space of 20 minutes, a Pushkin sonnet called How to Pushkin Sonnet. And it's on my webpage right
That's
now. It's
pretty
like,
good.
this is the form. And I sent it to my writing friends, and one of them said, I was turning into a Batman villain who spoke exclusively in Pushkin sonnets.
You think the Pushkin sonnets are your ally?
Mm.
Yeah.
All right. Is there anything else that you guys want to dive into, or how you guys feeling?
I don't know. Are there any other questions you've got? Magic toadstool?
Well, you know, I do. I have a lot of questions actually, but a lot of them are sort of more general. I guess I've never had the opportunity really to speak with, you know, as I said, this is my first time doing this kind of thing. So I've never had the opportunity to speak with authors, but this is sort of more general. So forgive me for that. But when you set out specifically to write these books, did you sort of have the entire plot in your head? Like, did you know how it was going to end, or did it start with the idea, start with the writing, and then it sort of took on a life of its own, so to speak, until it ended?
So for me, I wrote Vampire when I was like in a very, I wasn't sleeping like at all. And I wrote it in like a month and a half. And it was kind of like a crazy, hazy thing. But I wrote the beginning and then I wrote the ending. And then I was like, all right, and now I know where I want to go. And then when I submitted, Christine from Lanternfish was like, hey, so this ending, it feels like it might have been written like right before the, like, or right after the beginning, and it doesn't really like fit this story. And I was like, whoa, you fucking psychic. Like, how did you figure that out so quick? And that's kind of how I knew. I was like, Lanternfish is the place for me. Yeah. So to answer the question, yeah, like I had a beginning and an end, but the end was the wrong ending. So yeah, the story just like sort of happens. And then and Jessica, I don't know what your experience is like with this, because 2 years is a lot longer.
Yeah.
For me, like the story just kind of happened, and then Christina, Amanda, and Feliza made it a lot better.
Well, like I said, I'd been trying to figure out how to tell the story for a while. So I knew the beginning and the end, and then it was just like which particular details of the middle. But I had to figure those out fast, because you can't just pants sonnets. You know, so there was, I had a chart with little Post-its on it, you know, like when does this happen? What scene happens here? And I could move them around if necessary. And it just, you know, then it was just like, because you write a stanza and then you write the next one. And I remember people ask me like, do you ever skip it if it's hard and come back? I'm like, no, because I don't think I could. So it's like, there is a sex scene in sonnets, and I was terrified of writing that thing. Like, well, just skip it. I'm like, I can't skip it. I don't, it has to start here, and I have to know where it ends so I can write what happens afterward. It just has to be. So yeah, and then it just takes time, because I got good. There were times where I think my record was something like 20 stanzas in 1 month. But there were times where it's like, no, and I tell people my top secret, this is gold, I'm giving you gold. My top secret trick for when a stanza isn't working is I light a candle and I make myself a cup of tea, and then I get a pen and a notebook and I sit there and I write and I scratch out and I search and I try for as long as it takes until I solve the problem. Yeah.
So you'll rewrite the same stanza differently? Is that?
Sometimes, or, the stanzas break up very naturally. I always thought of the front 8 and the back 6. So sometimes it would be, okay, the front 8 is fine, but this back 6 isn't working. I need to try, why don't I write down a list of synonyms for this word? And then I'm going to write down all the words that rhyme with those synonyms and see if I can make a couplet out of them. And it sounds tedious, and it kind of is, but that's just what I had to do.
Yeah, my drafts are usually full of like all caps, bold, bracketed sentences like, hey, dipshit, come back to this. You still got to figure this one out. But then I'll just move on. And when I'm rereading it, I'm like, oh shit, I never figured that out. But then I have the stuff I know I want to have happen organically after, and then it's just like a little, I think of it more as like adding a stepping stone instead of like leaving the water running there.
Interesting. I'm curious now too if what projects you guys are working on now, and if either of you plan on doing anything sort of in a similar vein as to these books here.
Similar vein, you see what he did there?
Well done.
I wish
Well
that was
done.
intentional. I wish.
No, just claim it. Claim it.
No,
Go
it was
now.
totally
Yeah.
intentional.
On it.
There it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've got my super depressing abused teenager story, but I had a completed manuscript of a novel in like late 2019. My laptop was stolen out of my car in January of 2020.
Wow.
And had not been backing up on the cloud properly, but I had a manuscript in there, and it is likely what I will work on when I get back to spending more time writing. It is about Cain and Abel as God and Satan's lawyers who have been reincarnated forever and ever, working out the contract for the new Messiah, but they can't get anywhere because they just keep killing each other. And that's kind of the conceit to lead into a story about grappling with faith.
Very interesting. I will be looking for that title for sure.
Give it a few years.
Yeah.
I was always astonished too by how short the Cain and Abel verses are. Like it's only a handful of lines.
Yeah.
But so much is said.
Because it's kind of like, oh, wouldn't the human line die here? But and also, sorry, Jessica.
Yeah, well, my next book, people ask, is it going to be in verse? No, I thought about it. I almost did, but then I stopped myself. I'm doing sort of a riff on mythology, shocker, which is whenever you have a story where a king receives a prophecy that his son or his grandson is going to kill him, he always does something like tries to kill the kid or lock him in a box or something, and it never works. There's always some sort of accident or whatever. So I'm like, what would happen if the king gets this prophecy and says, well, gotta go sometime, and decides to go home and just, enjoy the years he has left with his kid? And that's where it started. And then it got complicated, and everything still manages to go to pot because it's a prophecy. I hate prophecies in novels, and yet here I am. And that's what I'm working on. And
That's how it happens.
The cool thing about it is that, like I said, I gave it to some beta testers, including my 11-year-old daughter. it's not necessarily a YA book, but you know, there's no smooching in it and stuff. So I figured she could, and she reads a lot of fantasy. So I wanted to know what her idea was. And she did the coolest thing for me, which is she drew my first piece of fan art.
Oh, cool.
Love
She
that.
drew one of the characters in it. So I'm like, this character connected enough with her that she wanted to draw this picture. So I must be onto something.
All I'm going to be thinking about is the prophecy where the kid kills the father and the father's like, oh, I got this one figured out. Like, and he just keeps trying to get the kid to kill him. But since the kid like doesn't like the dad, he's a contrarian where like dad puts sword in his eyes, like, fucking stab me. Come on, man. Come on, bud. Like, we're in this together. And the kid's like, you're so embarrassing, dad. With my friends. Yeah.
All right, so
All
that
right.
takes us to the hour mark. There's any sort of final statements or pitches you want to make before we close this out?
Buy
Now's
our
the time to-
books.
Yeah,
Yes.
certainly.
Our books.
And to anyone who may be seeing this, if you do not have the ability to purchase books, that's what social media and reviews are for. Those are gold. So I'm not begging, but I'm asking a lot. If you read our books and you like them, tell everybody.
That's good. That's smarter than what I said. Do that.
You can do both.
Well, again, I want
Yeah,
to
I mean,
thank you
correct.
guys both so much for doing this. I got a lot out of it. I'll be posting this recording onto our website where you can also find the links to purchase their books.
Yay.
Yes,
Huzzah.
indeed. And again, thank you both so much.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for having us.
Take care.
Bye.